at first. His face was somber, but then his expression lightened as he looked me over, and he laughed. "Good morning," he chuckled. "What's wrong?" I glanced down to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything important, like shoes or pants. "We match," he laughed again. I realized he had a long, light, tan sweater on, with a white collar showing underneath, and blue jeans. I laughed with him, hiding a secret twinge of regret. Why did he have to look like a runway model when I couldn't? I locked the door behind me. He walked to the truck. He waited by the passenger door with a martyred expression that was easy to understand. "We made a deal," I reminded him smugly, climbing into the driver's seat and reaching over to unlock his door. "Where to?" I asked. "Put your seatbelt on. I'm nervous already." I gave him a dirty look as I complied. "Where to?" I repeated with a sigh. "Take the 101 north," he ordered. It was surprisingly difficult to concentrate on the road while feeling his gaze on my face. I compensated by driving more carefully than usual through the still sleeping town. "Were you planning to make it out of Forks before nightfall?" "This truck is old enough to be your car's grandfather. Have some respect," I retorted. We were soon out of the town limits, despite his negativity. Thick underbrush and green swathed trunks replaced the lawns and houses. "Turn right on the 110, he instructed, just as I was about to ask. I obeyed silently. Now we drive until the pavement ends. I could hear a smile in his voice, but I was too afraid of driving off the road and proving him right to look over and be sure. "And what's there at the pavement's end?" I wondered. "A trail." "We're hiking? Thank goodness I'd worn tennis shoes. Is that a problem?" He sounded as if he'd expected as much. "No," I tried to make the lie sound confident. "But if he thought my truck was slow—" "Don't worry, it's only 5 miles or so, and we're in no hurry." 5 miles. I didn't answer, so that he wouldn't hear my voice crack in panic. 5 miles of treacherous roots and loose stones trying to twist my ankles or otherwise incapacitate me. This was going to be humiliating. We drove in silence for a while as I contemplated the coming horror. "What are you thinking?" he asked impatiently after a few moments. I lied again. "Just wondering where we're going." "It's a place I like to go when the weather is nice." We both glanced out the windows at the thinning clouds after he spoke. "Charlie said it would be warm today." "And did you tell Charlie what you were up to?" he asked. "Nope." "But Jessica thinks we're going to Seattle together." He seemed cheered by the idea. "No, I told her you canceled on me, which is true." "No one knows you're with me?" Angrily now. "That depends. I assume you told Alice." "That's very helpful, Bella," he snapped. I pretended I didn't hear that. "Are you so depressed by Forks that it's made you suicidal?" he demanded when I ignored him. "You said it might cause trouble for you, us being together publicly," I reminded him. "So you're worried about the trouble it might cause me if you don't come home?" His voice was still angry and bitingly sarcastic. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. He muttered something under his breath, speaking so quickly that I couldn't understand. We were silent for the rest of the drive. I could feel the waves of infuriated disapproval rolling off of him, and I could think of nothing to say. And then the road ended, constricting to a thin foot trail with a small wooden marker. I parked on the narrow shoulder and stepped out, afraid because he was angry with me and I didn't have driving as an excuse not to look at him. It was warm now, warmer than it had been in Forks since the day I had arrived. Almost muggy under the clouds. I pulled off my sweater and knotted it around my waist, glad that I'd worn the light sleeveless shirt, especially if I had 5 miles of hiking ahead of me. I heard his door slam and looked over to see that he'd removed his sweater too. He was facing away from me, into the unbroken forest by my truck. "This way," he said, glancing over his shoulder at me, eyes still annoyed. He started into the dark forest. "The trail?" Panic was clear in my voice as I hurried around the truck to catch up to him. "I said there was a trail at the end of the road, not that we were taking it." No trail? I asked desperately. I won't let you get lost. He turned then, with a mocking smile, and I stifled a gasp. His white shirt was sleeveless, and he wore it unbuttoned, so that the smooth white skin of his throat flowed uninterrupted over the marble contours of his chest. His perfect musculature no longer merely hinted at behind concealing clothes. He was too perfect, I realized, with a piercing stab of despair. There was no way this godlike creature could be meant for me. He stared at me, bewildered by my tortured expression. "Do you want to go home?" he said quietly, a different pain than mine saturating his voice. "No." I walked forward till I was close beside him, anxious not to waste 1 second of whatever time I might have with him. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I'm not a good hiker," I answered dully. "You'll have to be very patient." "I can be patient, if I make a great effort," he smiled, holding my glance, trying to lift me out of my sudden, unexplained dejection. I tried to smile back, but the smile was unconvincing. He scrutinized my face. "I'll take you home," he promised. I couldn't tell if the promise was unconditional or restricted to an immediate departure. I knew he thought it was fear that upset me, and I was grateful again that I was the one person whose mind he couldn't hear. "If you want me to hack 5 miles through the jungle before sundown, you'd better start leading the way," I said acidly. He frowned at me, struggling to understand my tone and expression. He gave up after a moment and led the way into the forest. It wasn't as hard as I had feared. The way was mostly flat, and he held the damp ferns and webs of moss aside for me. When his straight path took us over fallen trees or boulders, he would help me, lifting me up by the elbow and then releasing me instantly when I was clear. His cold touch on my skin never failed to make my heart thud erratically. Twice, when that happened, I caught a look on his face that made me sure he could somehow hear it. I tried to keep my eyes away from his perfection as much as possible, but I slipped often. Each time his beauty pierced me through with sadness. For the most part, we walked in silence. Occasionally, he would ask a random question that he hadn't gotten to in the past 2 days of interrogation. He asked about my birthdays, my grade school teachers, my childhood pets, and I had to admit that after killing 3 fish in a row, I'd given up on the whole institution. He laughed at that, louder than I was used to, bell-like echoes bouncing back to us from the empty woods. The hike took me most of the morning, but he never showed any sign of impatience. The forest spread out around us in a boundless labyrinth of ancient trees, and I began to be nervous that we would never find our way out again. He was perfectly at ease, comfortable in the green maze, never seeming to feel any doubt about our direction. After several hours, the light that filtered through the canopy transformed, the murky olive tone shifting to a brighter jade. The day had turned sunny, just as he'd foretold. For the first time since we'd entered the woods, I felt a thrill of excitement, which quickly turned to impatience. "Are we there yet?" I teased, pretending a scowl. "Nearly," he smiled at the change in my mood. "Do you see the brightness ahead?" I peered into the thick forest. Should I?" He smirked. "Maybe it's a bit too soon for your eyes." "Time to visit the optometrist," I muttered. His smirk grew more pronounced. But then, after another 100 yards, I could definitely see a lightning in the trees ahead, a glow that was yellow instead of green. I picked up the pace, my eagerness growing with every step. He let me lead now, following noiselessly. I reached the edge of the pool of light and stepped through the last fringe of ferns into the loveliest place I had ever seen. The meadow was small, perfectly round, and filled with wildflowers, violet, yellow, and soft white. Somewhere nearby I could hear the bubbling music of a stream. The sun was directly overhead, filling the circle with a haze of buttery sunshine. I walked slowly, awestruck, through the soft grass, swaying flowers and warm, gilded air. I halfway turned, wanting to share this with him, but he wasn't behind me when I thought he'd be. Where I thought he'd be. I spun around, searching for him with sudden alarm. Finally I spotted him, still under the dense shade of the canopy at the edge of the hollow, watching me with cautious eyes. Only then did I remember what the beauty of the meadow had driven from my mind, the enigma of Edward and the sun, which he'd promised to illustrate for me today.